There's then a seek for glory and a legend to unfold. Glory fades like morning mist, all we want's the gold.
Each player controls a faction, and each faction is made up of characters. Today we're going to look at how we create those characters and how we then combine them into their faction. The example I'm going to use is from our recent game at the Innsmouth Literary Festival. This was the first time that We Want the Gold had ever been unleashed on the general public. I found 5 brave volunteers to take part, and we're going to look at the faction sheet of the Monster Hunters. Now, the first thing you'll notice here is that there are only 4 characters in the faction. In the rules, we generally talk about 5 as being a good number. However, because we had a little bit less time to play at the ILF, I thought I'd just keep it to 4 characters. It helps speed things along a bit. But this is one of the good things with this rule set. You can have as many factions and as many characters as you like, depending on how many players you've got, how long you've got to play, and what sort of scenario you have. You can even split factions between players. In fact, on that very game, we had 2 players controlling the halflings. So you might have 10 players with 1 character each. You might have a faction of 6 characters split between 2 players, and so on and so on. All right, let's get back to our sheet. You'll notice at the top we have the faction name. So these are the Monster Hunters. We have the counter color that relates to activation, and we have automatic trait. So some types of character or faction will have automatic trait. For example, the Halfling faction all had the automatic trait of stealth. Now, if we come down and zoom in on Professor Van Halen here, we see a list of statistics. The first 4 are the primary statistics: strength, agility, will, and wit. These range from 3 to 18. So, in order to create the character, we've got a couple of different methods. One is to roll the dice. The second is to use a point system. In either way, the GM can prepare the characters in advance, which I did in this case, because obviously we're at a convention, time is short. Where you've got more time, then the players can create their own characters and put their own factions together. So the 2 methods are old school. You roll 4d6 4 times, you choose the highest scores, and you allocate them as you see fit. The other option is to use a point system. So you might say each player has 200 points to allocate to the various statistics. Out of the 2, I prefer the first. As I say, it's a little bit old school, and it does take me back to my early days of RPGing. So in the case of Professor Van Halen, we've allocated 11 points to strength, 12 to agility, 16 to will, and 15 to wit. We'll look at how these work exactly when we get onto the game mechanics, but of course, higher is better. That brings us on to our secondary statistics, starting with DF, defense factor. This is largely determined by the armor that the character is wearing, so a totally unarmored character will have a DF of 8. However, this can be modified by the character's agility and also their AF, an attack factor. A more skilled fighter is harder to hit. So, the defense factor is basically the character's capability to defend themselves. Then we come to AF. This will range from 0 to 5, with 0 being a novice, 5 being a mighty hero or warrior. If the players are rolling their own characters, then AF will be taken from a pool of points allocated to them by the Game Master. Next we come to weapon. In this case the Professor is wielding a sabre, which does 1d10 points of damage. Following this we come on to traits. The usual approach then is to give the player 3 traits to spread amongst the characters as they see fit. We have a big list of traits at the back. Those marked with D are a disadvantage. If a player chooses a disadvantage for one of their characters, they get a bonus trait. So if, for example, a player decides that one of his characters is going to have the disadvantage of arachnophobia, that faction will then get 4 traits to distribute rather than 3. Going back to the good professor, we can see that he has the automatic trait of leader, and he has also chosen the trait of scholar. This is in fitting with his character, of course, because he's a professor, and in game terms, this is going to help him to read and understand scrolls, and even possibly to cast spells from scrolls. If we zoom out and go back to the whole faction, we can see the extra 2 traits have been given to Frau Blucher, who has the trait of tough. That means she suffers no penalties in melee for losing hit points. Then we move on to Solomon, who has the trait fearless. He either is immune to fear or gets a hefty bonus on any saves versus fear. Now we come to Father Shandor, who has the trait of cleric. Now this is an automatic trait because your character can also be one of 3 classes. They can be a fighter, which covers men-at-arms, adventurers, barbarians, swordsmen, etc., etc. They can be a magic user, which covers mage, a cleric, a druid, or a necromancer, or they can be a thief, which means there'll be a cut purse, a grave robber, an assassin, a spy, and so on. If your character class is a magic user and you choose to be a cleric, you automatically get the trait of cleric. So going back to Father Shandor here, we see he has the trait of cleric, and underneath that we see SF spell factor of 2. So the spell factor again can be allocated by the GM if they are creating the party, or in the terms of players creating their own characters. Again, that will be taken from a pool of points that goes towards attack factor and spell factor. If we just go down to the bottom of the list there, we see HP health points. This is an average of strength and will plus a bonus dice roll, and what die you roll depends on your character class. So a fighter is going to get a bigger bonus, then a thief, and then a magic user will get the least bonus of all. Now you will also notice here on the cleric, spells. A spell factor of 2 means that Father Shandor can take 2 spells with him into the scenario, and he has chosen Thunderbolt and Bless. I'm going to talk more about the magic system later on, so let's just leave that there for now. But we will go back across to the Professor to see that he has a scroll. That particular scroll contains a banishment spell which relates directly to the scenario he's going into. Here you can also list any special or specific equipment that the characters might have. In the case of the monster hunters, they're usually carrying wooden stakes, for example. Perhaps 1 or 2 might have holy water. The GM might allocate potions or magic items or other things to the group as they see fit. We naturally assume that everyone will have the basic equipment according to their class. A thief is going to have a set of lockpicks, an adventurer is going to have some rope and all that kind of thing. So you don't have to be incredibly detailed in allocating equipment. It's more if there is anything really specific that you'd like your characters to be carrying. So objectives are determined largely by the GM, although not always, and they will relate to the particular scenario and what other factions are involved. Now we have some specific scenarios in the rules, we have a few detailed scenarios, and we also have a list of suggested scenarios as well that you can take and develop as you see fit. So this is where the imagination comes in for the GM. In some cases it might be quite easy. Here we've got the monster hunters. They're going to Innsmouth. What's Innsmouth known for? Monsters. So their objective in this case was pretty straightforward. Go to Innsmouth, sort out the monsters. In other cases we've used Professor Van Halen in order to go vampire hunting, so it might be a specific type of monster. In those scenarios, another faction were a team of necromancers. Now, they've got a different objective to the monster hunters, but of course they are natural enemies. So bringing in the objectives is a way of developing this interaction between the different players, which really is at the heart of the game. This is how you start building your narratives. And I suppose really these objectives can be as simple or as complex as you like. We've tended to keep things pretty simple so far. Go in and find the hidden chest of gold, or go in and kidnap the priest, go in and get revenge against the guards, that kind of stuff. So pretty straightforward. But what we have found, especially when we started linking scenarios together in a mini campaign, is that objectives started developing themselves. In the first scenario, the halfling thieves stole the guard's gold. In the second scenario, the guard's objective is to try and get it back. So this is why I talk so much about the narrative within the game, because that becomes the glue that kind of binds everything else together. Just to recap then, we have our character creation, 4d6 for the 4 primary stats. From there we can work out our health points. Our defense factor is the armor plus any bonuses or negatives for agility and skill. The GM will assign a pool of points that are allocated to attack factor and spell factor. You decide any specific equipment you want to be taking. You add in your weapons and the damage they do. Oh, and of course, if you've got a high strength, you'll be getting a bonus on that damage as well. And you allocate your traits. As we've said, there's a nice long list of traits and disadvantages at the back as well, not just for the characters, but also for the creatures as well. And of course, as in all things, we strongly encourage you to make up your own. With the points and traits all allocated, with the faction sheets ready, we can now start to play the game.
'Cause us, we want the gold.